There's a great saying that has been uttered and re-uttered and other different words and different phrases been said throughout history. And it always boils down to about the same equivalent of with great knowledge comes great sorrow. Or the more you know, the more responsibility that is carried with it. The burden of knowledge. So there's a bit of misconception about what knowledge is, about the truth of knowledge. What does it really mean to be knowledgeable? You see, there is a difference between smart and wise. Now, which one is knowledge? Which one applies to each? Smart person, by all conventional tests that we give as a society and by our leading experts and all this BS, one person is determined to be intelligent based off of their critical thinking skills, their problem-solving methods, and their ability to look at a situation and find a viable alternative with the least amount of necessary force or parts or profits or whatever. A person who is wise is someone that has gone through life, gaining many experiences, good, bad, and ugly, and has learned from those experiences. And so they develop words of wisdom. They develop ways to get out of a situation that doesn't involve critical thinking, but involves experience and memory. Because the more we change, the more we stay the same. The more anything changes in this world, in this society, in this country, they will stay the same. I had a conversation a couple of days ago with my girlfriend, and she is a feminist, but she is not what I, sometimes refer to as the extreme feminism. Extreme feminism is what a lot of people think of that don't know anything about feminism because it makes the most noise. And it's actually not what most feminists stand for. But in terms of wanting equality, she is a feminist in that aspect, and she has a lot of good points about it. But I said something to her that kind of stopped her in her tracks, and kind of one of those like, "Whew, wow, I didn't think of that." And it started because she asked me the question of, well, the way that the change is happening, it can either be fluid or forced, but it's happening. Women are getting more and more rights, and all these things are changing. And I said, yes, but that's not going to solve anything. I was like, there will always be a group that is fighting for rights. Before the women's rights, or I'm sorry, let me go back to the recent. Before we had all of this LGBTQ, the fight for the gay rights, which I have no problem with. I think as a human being, you should have the right to love whoever you want. I don't care. It's not important to me. It's only when you involve religion and you involve different types of philosophies, that comes with those religions, then it becomes this moral high ground. But I said before, it was the LGBTQ. It was blacks, people who are of African American descent that came to this country through one way or another, through the means of slavery. They weren't even considered a whole person. There's a law that was written in the books back in the early days of America when we were doing all these different types of segregation of the different states and who had this much power, who had that much power. And the North was afraid that the South would have too much power because of their population of blacks, of slaves. And back then, your voting power was a reflection of how many people were in your state, to a lesser degree. And the northern states feared that the southern states would have more power because of the amount of slaves they had. And so, as a response, the government decided to make each slave like 5/3 or 4/5, not even a human being. Then we fast forward to 1960 and everything that led up to that, and this constant fight and this gradual, a lot of people had realized in World War II especially that black people fought alongside with the white people and did just as good a job, if not better. Their valor was just the same. Wait a minute, they're human beings. Wait a minute, maybe they're Americans. You know, and we had this big awakening. It was slow at first, but finally you had to have someone like Martin Luther King Jr. to come along. Someone who just was, in a way, destined to be that voice. It could have just as easily been Michael Dokes or Joe Watts or just, you know, but it was him. And even though things seem like they're just as bad as they were, there is a lot of change and a lot of improvement. You know, the fact that we had a black president would have been a laughing joke amongst the whites in 1950 and would have been a fervent dream of blacks. It just was never going to happen the way things were going at that particular time. And I think there is a lot of racism on both sides. It's not just white on black, it's black on white, and it's white on white, and it's black on black. Hey, we're human beings. We are going to be racist towards something. Always have, and we always will. Because we can't get out of our own brains. We can't change how our brains work. You know, even people that have become enlightened and woken up, they still have, you know, prejudices. This is who we are. It's not about trying to stop that. It's learning to accept that that's a part of who you are. But before the blacks, it was women. Women had no rights. Not in this country. I mean, and there have been societies where women had more rights. Look at Sparta. Sparta was a very, very interesting, it was more of an exception than a rule. But women had immense power there. And I won't go into how, mainly because I would love for you to read up on it. The more you read, the more knowledge you pertain, right? We're going to get back to that knowledge thing, though. So before women, it was X, Y, and Z. Since civilization has begun, since we have known and documented and can go as far back as we can to determine the first civilization, we have always had inequality. There has always been poverty. There have always been the rich, and there have always been the poor, and then there have always been the vast amount of people in the middle that holds it all together. It has always been like that. Because that is one of the recipes for society to work. It's fundamentally ingrained. And then as the generations change and as our viewpoints and our ideas and our allegiances and all that starts to shift in different directions, we start putting focus on some of these things that are unequal. One of the first things in this country that we declared war on was poverty. And poverty is just as bad now as it was when it was first introduced to fighting it. I believe it was Lyndon B. Johnson. I can't remember the exact year, but 60s or 70s. But this war has been going on for a long time, and not only has it made no impact, it's gotten a little bit worse. So inequality will always exist in a society. It has to. Because if everybody is on the top, who is going to be in the middle and the bottom to support you? If everybody is in the bottom, there is no middle and top. There is no advancements in sciences. There is no funding for this. If everybody wants to be in the middle, well, they have nothing to stand on, nor nothing to reach to. It's a system that goes together. And I don't know if it was by design. I think it's just who we are as people, as human beings, the way our minds work, the way we like to put things into boxes, the way we like to label things. You know, we try to control our environment by creating terms and definitions to those terms that make sense to us. But this is how it is. And we have a lot of things going on in our country, in America, with identity politics and the whole different pronouns and stuff like that. And there's a lot of heated debate. There is a lot of political correctness going on. And it's funny because just a few years ago, I would be knee-deep in this conversation. Oh, I was an absolute... I hated political correctness. I thought it was the dumbest thing. I was a Republican. You know, a Reagan Republican is what they say. And That's the thing about knowledge, about what knowledge is. What is knowledge? Is knowledge what you know, what you've learned, what you've experienced, what you do with those experiences? What is knowledge? You know, I see people like Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro, and they're very smart people, intellectuals. And a lot of them make sense. What Jordan says, a lot of it makes sense. I understand a lot more than what he's saying than some other people do, because there's a little bit of that mix with he's a part of this or he's a part of that group, and it's just, that's always going to happen. It doesn't matter what side you represent, doesn't matter what your truth is, you're going to have people that's going to mess with you. People that are going to try to twist your facts to make you look worse. It's always been that way. It doesn't matter what side you're on. Long before there was an invention of Republicans and Democrats, that existed. But knowledge is fake. Knowledge is false. I don't know anything. And I want you to listen to that and let that sink in for a second. That you, just like me, you don't know anything. You have no knowledge. Okay? Now, instead of, from that point of view, taking the stance of offensive, or you don't know me, or throw that away. You're getting in your own way automatically. Throw that out and do what's called kenosis, self-emptying. Just act like you've never been offended in your life before, or you've never taken a stance on something before. Just, you have no knowledge, nothing. You're an empty, blank slate. You're a canvas that has no paint on it. And now imagine that canvas. Doesn't matter how big or how small, but let's just say something that Bob Ross would paint on. Now in the middle of that canvas, I want you to paint a circle, draw a circle, however you want. It doesn't matter. I want the circle to be, I don't know, probably a good 6 inches in diameter at least, but a big enough circle to where you can write stuff in it. Now that circle represents the whole of anything and everything that human beings can learn. Everything that the 5 senses can interact with. Because our reality is based off what we can see, what we can hear, what we can taste, what we can touch, and what we can smell. If it does not interact with any of those 5s, it is not considered in part of reality. So that circle is the total of all of the knowledge, all of the sciences, because you don't know everything about everything. No one does. There is no way to know everything about everything. And now I want you to be honest with yourself, because you're the only one that can see this. Fill in how much of that circle that you think you know about the whole of all of knowledge. Is it 0.3%? Is it 5%? Is it 10%? Is it 20%? It's not 100%, because then you would be what's called omnipotent. Omnipotent. And no one on this planet is omnipotent. It's funny is, hold on to that after you've taken some time to think about where your percentage is. I actually got this because I was, how you go through YouTube, you go down the rabbit hole and you end up on different pages. And I ended up on one of those videos where a guy was talking about how he shut down an atheist in 2 minutes. And to this guy's credit, he brilliant. This pastor, he went to a conference explaining, why God doesn't exist, and he's to prove why God does. And the whole premise was they were going to give him 10 minutes to do it, and he said he only needed 2. So the atheist goes up and gives his whole spiel about how no reasonable person, no logical person could believe in God, blah, 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 the whole spiel. It's a rhetoric that I know very well. It's what people spout, but they don't actually, they don't take the time to think about the different avenues of that knowledge. It's just this versus that. It's how we see things in this world. And so the circle that you just drew, everything like that, the pastor did the exact same thing. And then he said, after the guy marked, 10%, he said, so this other 90% is what you don't know. And the guy said yes. He said, so conclusively then, by your own logic, God could exist in that 90%. And the guy said, well, yes. Got him, stumped him. And that made it look very good for the pastor. But the pastor was he was smart, he was tricky. He used his own language against him. He used his own logic against him. And that would probably stump a lot of people. Had I been there, it would have been a different story, but not to prove him wrong or right, just to show the whole point of it all. So in this circle, and see, that's where he stopped at, is that circle. So now you have this circle that you've painted or you've drawn, and you filled in what you think it is. And the rest of that, again, is what you don't know. And then you can put everything that we have conceived as human beings, as minds, with words and feelings, and put it in that circle too. And yes, God could be in there, this could be in there, that could be in there. Okay? What about the rest of the canvas outside of that circle? What about the room that canvas is on? What about that house? What about that street? What about that state? What about that country? What about that planet? In that galaxy, a part of that supercluster. Our knowledge literally is as big as that circle. That's as much as we know, and we can only fit within that circle because our brains will not allow us to perceive other dimensions or other ways of thinking because we haven't invented it. See, there is no true knowledge. There is everything that we say, we're speaking within that sphere. And it's a very limited sphere. Within that sphere, I'm considered very intelligent. I mean, I've taken the tests that you need to take. My IQ's, pretty impressive. It's like in the 130s or something. I don't know, 140s. But that doesn't make me smart. That makes me smart within the boundaries of limitations. When a sumo wrestler is going up against a small guy in a very small circle, who do you think has the advantage? Who wrote the rules for that? Well, it's going to highly, give the favor to the sumo wrestler in a small space against a skinny guy. It's just not fair. So you can learn all this information. You can come up with all these different hypotheses and elegant words of speaking, but it all exists within this small circle. Were there galaxies in the sky, the stars that we see at night? We know now they're galaxies. Some of them are stars, but most of them are other galaxies. Did we know 1,000 years ago they were galaxies? Did they even exist at that point? Were they always galaxies? Or were they only galaxies the moment we named them galaxies? Is the sun and the Earth exactly one AU, one astronomical unit away from each other? Has it always been that distance? You see, if we weren't around to say that that's how far it was it really that far away? Did it matter? Nothing in this universe has a label. It has a name, it has a meaning, it has a term. There's no reason for any of it. There's no reason to have a reason. The reasoning is human. We superimpose ourselves out on everything, and we label things. And I had explained this to someone that says, well, then how come science is always proven right? How come all these numbers work then? I'm like, because we designed them to work. We're writing our own code. If we were a software program, and the purpose of the software program is to try to make understanding of the computer, it would write code that would give it the rules to understand it. You see, we made up things that made sense to us. We came up with numbers in the first place. Math is not a universal language. Show me where a 2 exists in the natural world. It's not a universal language. It's a language that humans created. We created it. Just like every single thing else in this life, everything that you know today, everything was invented by mankind to make sense of its environment and improved upon to make life easier. But the sun is not called a sun. It is not one astronomical unit away from the earth. That doesn't exist. It's as far as it needs to be away to inhabit life, and it is harmonious. It doesn't need an explanation. The universe does not need an explanation. The sense of it is that it makes no sense. But human beings want to make sense of everything. So all the way down to today, identity politics, and with all of these different, backs and forth, we're all just in this sphere. We're like ants, just arguing amongst ourselves about who gets the last little, bit of that dead carcass. We don't understand anything. We don't know anything because all of our influence and all of our knowledge is limited to this rock ball. And it's not nothing. We don't know anything. For everything that we have discovered in this universe, think about how much more we have yet to discover. And what if I told you that there was a star that had 17 stars surrounding it, and then they formed a hexapherical teleportation that links you to any other part of any other galaxy ever? Sounds like science fiction. Sounds like it's just made up on the spot, which it is. I just made that up. But what if it is out there, and we have just yet to discover it? It'd be a science fiction now. But what if in 100 years, 1,000 years, if we make it that far, we discover, oh wow, new discovery, a 17, star system that, orbits each other in such a way that creates a wormhole that we don't know what is and is out there. So it's not real until we discover it and label it. Then it becomes real. So with the guy the pastor who put up that little circle with God in there, well, what about the rest of the paper? That is stuff that you can't know, won't ever get a chance to learn. We have limited, we put a box in ourselves. Our mind put itself in a box. I wouldn't even say that we did. Say the way that our mind works, put limitations on itself right off the bat. So, could there be a God? I don't know. God is a man-made word. Think about that. The whole concept of a God is man-made. I'm not talking about whether God exists or doesn't exist. I'm talking about the concept, the words, what we used to define God, what we used to describe a God. What does a God do? What does a God see? What does a God feel? All of that came from man. Truth is, I don't know. Just like I said earlier, I don't know anything. And within this, like I said, within this sphere, I am considered intelligent. But that intelligence amounts to nothing because I have figured it out. That in the grand scheme of everything, that is everything, we're very minute. We're not even an eyelash bat. We don't matter. But instead of taking a nihilistic view about that, that's precisely why we matter. Because we don't. We make the biggest things out of nothing. And that can be great things and that can be bad things. But we're just nothing. Yet we exist in this nothingness. For better or worse, pretty harmoniously. We have the ability to breathe air. We have the ability to make music. So it's not a bad thing that we're meaningless. We give meaning to meaninglessness. That's pretty impressive. But the problem with today is that we're in a perpetual pissing contest with one another. Especially with the evolution of social media and YouTube and how everybody has a degree in something now because you're hiding behind a computer screen. You see, there's no fear of recourse. There's no human interaction. I mean, nobody knows who you are. So you can be as mean or as intelligent as you want people to think. YouTube is just garbage when it comes to people getting on there and just going at it on every sorts of video. You're always going to have what they call trolls, and then you're going to have social justice warriors. You're going to have just that one guy who thinks he knows what he's talking about and then talks down to everybody else, who could actually end up being a girl in real life. You don't know. And it's just, that is what we have evolved into as a society. We are losing the ability to intercommunicate with one another. Interpersonal communication. You go out with your friends at night. How many of them are on their phones just doing whatever? You know, do you ever just put your phones down and talk to each other? And even adults, like older adults, are doing it. Like I saw this woman, she had to be in her 50s, was walking across Walmart parking lot on her phone. Like she never even looked up. Because she's thinking, okay, well, I'm in a yield zone. No one's going to stop for me. Or no one's going to not stop for me. You could have just as easily gotten plowed into someone who, just didn't see you. It's not on the person that's in the car. It's on you. And she was so glued into her phone. She could have easily tripped in front of a car. But we have started shifting our consciousness into this technological world. And this has messed up our ability to learn. Our attention span is shorter. Our short memory, I dare say, is getting worse. Because there's no need to memorize. Because we have Google. We have infinite uses of resources of knowledge in our hands. Why memorize it? You can always just look it up again. Like, okay, Google, what's the height of the Eiffel Tower? 2 days later, hey man, what was the height of the Eiffel Tower? Oh shit, I forgot. Hey, okay, Google. So that's all you got to do. So your short-term memory is getting bad. So, well, how do we change that? I don't know that we can. I think that it's just natural that with the progression of technology, it pushes us into different avenues. And 100 years from now, people that look back at when I was a kid, where there wasn't even internet, they'll probably look at us as barbarians. Like, how could they have lived life like that? What nonsense, It's the same way that we look back in the Dark Ages or the Middle Ages. It's like, how could they do stuff like that? They didn't have the technology available. They didn't develop it. We did. So I would be careful for the people online who just think they're so knowledgeable on everything and they go out of their way to demagogue and to put people down. I don't know if it makes them feel better, or maybe it's just a way of producing a satisfaction out of what would be an otherwise unsatisfactory life. It's just, I don't know. I have no idea. And it's not going to stop. So there's no point in saying, oh, stop, hashtag this, none of that stuff doesn't work. But I would just say, just think, for everything that you know, there is an infinite amount of stuff that you don't. And I can only use the language that I have. I can, in a lot of ways, if you've listened to some of my other videos, I kind of woke up in a colossal, cosmic way. But I realized that I am still very much limited to the brain that I am in. I recognize now that there is so much more out there. Just not in terms of distance or things, but in terms of knowledge. That for everything that I have ever learned, there is just so much more that I won't and can't. And the more you think you know something, the more blinded you get with ego, the less susceptible you are to changing that. You are your own worst enemy.